Welcome to the next chapter. It is classification 1. Now, if you take a look at the world around you, one clear thing is the endless variety of living things from plants to animals. Living things are also called living organisms. The differences are apparent by merely looking at the physical features of the organisms. There are countless number of living organisms occupying and adapted to various environments. However, you may also have noticed that two or more different organisms may bear resemblance to a certain degree, but not absolutely. It therefore becomes necessary for easy understanding to classify organisms into groups based on their structural similarities and differences. So then classification comes in. And classification is a field of biology that deals with the grouping of living organisms according to their structure. Organisms with structures that are similar are put under one group referred to as a taxon, or in plural they are called taxa. The grouping also takes into account the evolutionary relationships, since all organisms at one point had a common origin. The science of classification is called taxonomy. So then what is the importance of this classification? And classification is necessary because of a number of reasons. It helps in identifying living organisms into their correct groups for references. Grouping also brings together living organisms with similar characteristics but separates those with different features. It helps us arrange the information about living organisms in an orderly manner to avoid chaos and confusion that would arise if this were to be done arbitrarily. Finally, it helps us understand the evolutionary relationships between different organisms. Now, in early times, classification was artificial since the placing of living organisms into groups was based on a few observable characteristics. Most of these characteristics were personal conveniences to the early biologists. This type of classification was in use for about 2,000 years. In one such method, living organisms would be grouped into plants and animals. The plants would further be grouped down into herbs, shrubs, and trees, while animals were grouped into several groups like carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores. Some biologists yet classified plants as edible, non-edible, fungi, and bacteria. Well, we've come a long way, and modern classification has overcome the weaknesses of artificial classification. Modern classification uses evolutionary relationships between specimens and their ancestors. From the original parents, there arose new groups of organisms that underwent structural changes, which enabled them to live in different habitats. This is what led to the diversity of living organisms observed today. The science of classification was pioneered by a Swedish scientist, Carolus Linnaeus, and today modern scientists have perfected this field by studying his original work. Taxonomic units of classification. Now, this refers to the groups or taxa into which organisms are placed as a matter of convenience. The grouping is based on easily observable characteristics that are common in the group. Each taxonomic unit reflects the position of an organism in relationship to others in the classification scheme. In a classification scheme, a hierarchy of groups is recognized, and it proceeds from the first, largest, and highest group, the kingdom, to the smallest and lowest unit, the species. There are 7 major taxonomic units, namely kingdom, phylum for animals and division for plants, class, order, family, genus, and species. The kingdom. Living organisms are grouped into 5 kingdoms. The first and the most primitive kingdom is that of Monera. Kingdom Monera is the kingdom of bacteria. Kingdom Protoctista, whose members include the algae and protozoa. Kingdom Fungi comprise the molds, yeast, and mushrooms. Kingdom Plantae comprises the plants, ferns, maize plants, garden pea, pine, trees, and many others. And Kingdom Animalia, whose members include mammals, birds, fishes, reptiles, and others. A kingdom is divided further into several phyla or divisions in the case of plants. The phylum, which is the second largest group, sorts out organisms based on the body plan and form. Within the phylum, members are further divided into groups called classes. The basis of a significant variation in the fundamental plan is usually in adaptation to a special way of life. Each class is divided into smaller groups called orders using some structural features. The orders are also divided into families using some structural features, and then the families are divided into genera or singular genus. In a genus, structural features are not easily observable by most people since the grouping is based on fairly recent common ancestral features that are less adaptive. However, the genus can be divided into smaller units called species. The species represent what scientists would refer to as a kind of animal or plant. As we go down the hierarchy, the number of organisms in each group decreases, but the similarities between them increases. A species is the smallest unit of classification which has hereditary distinction from any other group and whose members naturally interbreed to produce a fertile offspring. Within the members of a species, minor differences are still exhibited. Such include skin color in human beings and varieties in plants. The groups obtained on the basis of the subdivision of a species are termed as varieties, races, or strains. The differences are usually superficial, unlike those which distinguish a species from another. These subspecies form additional ranks which may be added to hierarchy of classification. Scientific naming of living organisms. Now, the present system of naming living organisms was developed by Carolus Linnaeus in the 18th century, and it involves giving living organisms 2 names in the Latin language. The Latin language was widely spoken and used by the scientists during the Carolus Linnaeus times. Generally, living organisms have their scientific names and common names. The common names are the local names by which they are known in their local or vernacular languages. So you realize if the scientists were to use the local names, they would not be able to communicate with each other easily. This way, sharing of scientific information and knowledge would be difficult. This necessitated the need to develop a scientific language, and that language happened to be Latin. So because of this, the scientific names are the valid names by which living organisms are known all over the world. In scientific naming, an organism is given a specific name which adopts 2 names. This double naming system is called binomial system or binomial nomenclature. In binomial system, an organism is known both by its genus and species names. The assigning of scientific names to a living organism is governed by a definite set of rules which are internationally recognized and referred to as binomial nomenclature, which literally means rules of double naming system. The principles of the binomial nomenclature requires that 1. The first part of the scientific name is that of the genus and it should begin with a capital letter, and the second name is that of the species. the species name should be written in small letters. For example, the lion is identified as Panthera leo. The Panthera is the genus and leo is the species. The leopard is known as Panthera pardus. The domestic dog is called a Canis familiaris. Humans are recognized as Homo sapiens. The information given above suggests that the lion and the leopard are closely related since they belong to the same genus. They, however, belong to different species. The scientific names should be printed in italics in books and printed works, but in handwritten manuscript and typed work, they should be underlined as separate words as shown here. Now, at this point, it is important to mention that more and more research is ongoing and new organisms are being discovered daily. So, upon discovery of a living organism, a scientific name must be assigned to that organism. The name assigned to such an organism must be Latinized if it is not from the Latin world. Quite often, the name adopted may be that of the scientist who first adequately described that organism or the local area where that organism was found. For example, Aloe kilifiensis is a member of the Aloysia family first discovered in Kilifi.
Without many of these discoveries and inventions, few of us would be alive today. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 greatest medical breakthroughs in history. Number 10. In vitro fertilization. Kicking off our list is the medical advancement that permanently altered the landscape of reproductive medicine in the late 1970s. That was when British physiologist Robert G. Edwards developed the method by which eggs are fertilized by sperm inside a laboratory and subsequently transferred to a woman's uterus. As a result, he helped thousands of infertile individuals conceive children successfully.